Today we'll be discussing the topic of healthy boundaries. What are healthy boundaries and how can we communicate healthy boundaries in ways that actually work? Most people don't actually seem to have healthy boundaries because they're not honoring how they really feel and living in alignment with that. It's easy to live out of fear and guilt and shame, to let other people's opinions, the way that we've been conditioned through society, the education system, religion, and pretty much a bunch of cultural brainwash to tell us how we should or shouldn't operate. It can feel exhausting to go day after day living the same kind of lifestyle and making decisions that are not really authentic to our own personal experience. It doesn't help with self-confidence, self-esteem, self-trust, or any form of self-love in that matter, because constantly seeking validation externalizes our own power. Having healthy boundaries looks like actually letting people know how it is that our inner worlds are operating so that our external world can flow with ease. If something in our external world is not functioning or flowing in accordance with what feels good to us, that means saying no. It also means saying yes to what feels like a yes to us and going in the direction of that. Healthy boundaries do not look like trying to control other people, though. It's more so an eminence of what it is that we actually do want and need, and allowing other people to meet us at that level. It's pretty much saying that I'm going to keep rising and going toward what is my fate, and if you'd like to meet me there, you can. However, I'm not going to force you to. It's a way of raising that standard and expressing our intention out into the universe, knowing that when we ask, it is given. It is very toxic when we don't have healthy boundaries with ourselves and constantly violate our own boundaries or let other people violate our boundaries, because there's no way to actually live a healthy life by people pleasing all the time, putting on a mask and show and pretending to be something we're not, and really just going into what we think will make us lovable and not letting other people actually love us for who we are. People can feel duped. We can feel like we're being loved for a facade, and it overall does not aid in healthy relationships. What people are unwilling to see when they're violating their own boundaries or other people have violated their boundaries, and when they violate other people's boundaries, is that they're actually responsible. Accountability is really tough work, and it's not fun, comfortable, or easy. It takes radical self-acceptance and willingness to acknowledge our own shadows, our own mistakes, and our own areas to grow. When we do that, though, we're able to actually pinpoint the underlying root cause of scenarios and where conflicts actually occur, what needs there are, and how to meet them or communicate them in healthier ways so they can get met by those that are compatible. Part of why people have such unhealthy boundaries in life is because they're working with incompatible energies. When people, relationships, situations, transactions, and interactions are not cohesive or functional and in alignment, they are actually incompatible. Incompatibility is a incongruency of how things work together, and it's like putting a square peg in a round hole. It just doesn't fit right. You could try to force it, but it just doesn't work in the end, and even if you attempt to, everyone ends up either frustrated, burnt out, or annoyed, and people end up without their needs being met, or boundaries end up getting violated. It's really inconvenient and uncomfortable when we realize that we may not have healthy boundaries once we're deeper into a relationship or situation. It's a lot healthier to use boundaries as a preventive measure to express what we are and aren't okay with. That way, people can know ahead of time, or other people can let us know ahead of time, so we don't have to then deal with the aftermath after a conflict or rupture or disagreement and perhaps even an argument occurs. Ideally, all that can be avoided and we can just steer clear from the start. However, if it doesn't and we do experience challenges and conflicts, it's important not to bypass those things and pretend that it's all good, gaslight others, or let others gaslight us when we know that something is not okay for us. Gaslighting happens with boundaries more often than people realize because it's not always intentional. Although it sometimes may be where someone is specifically trying to invalidate how we feel or our experience, especially when we attempt to voice it and stand up for our boundaries, it's not always the case. In some cases, you may say no and someone continues to try to do something, and that is a clear boundary violation that is intentional when they're aware of that. However, sometimes we might say no to something and someone might forget later on and then do something. That happens. It's human to make mistakes and then try to avoid taking ownership of it. It's kind of like when a child messes up and then pretends they didn't do it or blames someone else. In adult relationships, it's not as fun or healthy when people behave this way. It can be very immature and counterproductive to nurturing and fostering healthy and functional and deep intimacy in relationships. It's good to have some flexibility and boundaries in that sense because, once again, people make mistakes, there's room for error, there's room for growth, and part of how we learn having healthy boundaries is sometimes not having healthy boundaries or violating other people's boundaries or other people violating our boundaries, and that can be the lesson of what guides us toward having healthier boundaries in the first place. Yet there are moments and situations where it's important to have very strong boundaries and not tolerate that level of error when we've made it clear multiple times, or someone's trying to gaslight us, or we just know in our heart of hearts that we feel like we're being manipulated, or someone's not actually caring to respect our boundaries and that we've made it really clear. In those situations, it's best to either set the boundary and stick to it, or just remove yourself completely from the situation if it's incompatible and the person's unavailable and unwilling to meet your needs or find a common ground with you. Also, if they're willing to continue to play zero-sum games with you where they expect you to compromise how you feel and what your boundaries and needs are for their best interests, that's not a reciprocal two-way street or relationship. It's actually a form of abuse or mistreatment and dysfunction that's ultimately not going to lead to one's happiness. Having healthy boundaries with ourselves means being authentic and honest with ourselves when something or someone doesn't feel right, when we get red flags, and when our gut's telling us no. Things might seem too good to be true, yet we still go for them sometimes, and that's naive and foolish and irresponsible when we know in our heart of hearts that it's a no. If something's not a blatant and obvious, exciting, inspirational yes, it may actually be a no, and probably is a no. And sometimes maybes can be a yes, but still, if it's not a yes, it's a no. If people can't respect a no and a boundary that you set time and time again, that's something to pay attention to. However, sometimes people have unhealthy boundaries and they think they have healthy boundaries, and we may sometimes fall into that trap as well. We may tell someone how we feel about something, but do it in a way that kind of controls their actions rather than saying what it is that we need and meeting our own needs. An example of this is if we tell someone that we don't like something and then they do it and violate a boundary of ours. A good way to respond to that would be to say, hey, I feel uncomfortable with this behavior. I need you to hear that out and respect that if you'd like to continue communication with me. If you don't, I'm simply going to stop responding or completely cut off contact with you as a friend because I'm worthy of respect and this is what I need in my relationships to feel safe. Healthy boundaries are expression of our drive toward creating the solution. Another example of a healthy boundary could be something like, I appreciate being treated with compassion when I'm going through things rather than being told that it's solely my fault or responsibility for the mistakes in my life. I understand that. However, I just value a little more care while I'm going through this time right now. It's an acknowledgement of what we feel without making it about someone else, what we need in that moment, and then it can also follow up with a consequence, which is really important. Having consequences to people not meeting our boundaries is not a punishment. It is not a way to try to guilt trip them or manipulate them or coerce them into doing what it is that we want or need. It's more so just letting people know that this is where I'm at, this is what I require, and if you're unable to do that or continue not, I'm simply going to go where it can be taken care of. So nothing personal, just going to follow my best interests. If that's not in their best interests, you may be able to find a common ground still and work things out where you meet that need through someone else and still are able to have a relationship with them where they meet other needs and you meet the needs that you can for them. But if the situation ends up being incompatible, it's best to address how to mutually agree on perhaps a different style of relationship or ending the relationship and moving on. Addressing the situation safely is really important with healthy boundaries. Sometimes it is impossible to have healthy boundaries with people who are emotionally, physically, financially, spiritually, or in any way abusive. If they are family, friend, or partner, it can be a lot harder if they're behaving in abusive ways or continuously violating your boundaries. People can feel more comfortable over time because they are close with you or develop a strong bond or tie or feeling of safety and comfortability. That familiarity can lead to people behaving in abusive ways, especially if they experienced abuse growing up or have had cycles and patterns of abuse without people holding them accountable to healthier and better behavior. So it's important to realize not everyone's going to respect your boundaries. Not everyone has healthy boundaries. And despite your attempts to set healthy boundaries, people are still going to violate your boundaries because they're human. That being said, some people will try to gaslight and manipulate you or undermine your boundaries and make it seem like you may be crazy. On the other hand, sometimes we may not actually have those healthy boundaries and be in resistance to something that it is that we don't want, trying to avoid something we don't want, or trying to tell people how they shouldn't feel or shame them without even realizing it. In those situations, it's important to do the self-reflection work to realize how we can set healthier boundaries and respect and honor other people and have more patience and grace and compassion with them rather than snapping or getting very upset once they aren't able to immediately adhere to our boundaries, because that's not a healthy boundary if we're being too rigid. Juxtaposed to that, if other people are setting boundaries and we don't feel like they're healthy, it's important to acknowledge and communicate that as well. We can still respect what people say and feel without bulldozing through their boundaries. A good way to do that is to say, hey, I hear you and I see you and I understand where you're coming from. Thanks for voicing how you feel. However, I feel like I'm being controlled or manipulated in this sense, and this boundary doesn't really feel healthy for me. How about we do this instead to meet that need or honor your boundary? Or is there perhaps a way that you could communicate this based on what you feel and what you need rather than about me or my behavior and other alternatives that I can do to meet that? So it's really about staying open-minded, flexible, and cooperative with each other to create fun and exciting and mutually beneficial solutions rather than it needing to be an argument, a battle, or a way where we feel like we need to control each other to try to put the person in a corner so that they become what we want them to be. Bulldozing happens in boundaries, and gaslighting is just one form of it. But bulldozing is when someone doesn't listen to the feelings and boundaries and needs of another person or themselves. It can be pushing past a no, but it can also be just not listening and not being attuned or aware. This happens when we don't really ground ourselves in our presence, in our bodies, and in our minds and hearts and souls. So a good way is to connect our breath through our nose, to be in tune with our body and the sensations in it, and really listen to our gut, our emotions, our heart, and what our soul is telling us, our intuition. From there, listening to others and actively engaging with them, taking part in their body language, and just having inventories where we sense if other people's energy feels good and comfortable around us, or if there's a slight bit of tension, we can tune in and see if we're really in alignment with them or on the same page with them. Good way to really find out is to simply ask, to let people know that, hey, I care about you and something feels off, or are you okay? Is there any boundary that you have right now that you'd like to voice? And also, maybe if you have a boundary to voice, to say, hey, I feel like we need a pause. Are you open to my feedback? And do you consent to some dialogue about what I'm feeling and going through? When people say yes to that, it's a lot safer than just projecting at them with what our experience is, or assuming that they should tell us when they feel a certain way. It's also nice because if other people are assuming that we should read their mind, or we're assuming that they should read ours, it breaks the ice and that whole barrier. Having unhealthy boundaries and being inauthentic is like a barrier to real love, friendship, and relationships. It pushes people away. It doesn't really resolve what's going on beneath the surface, and it doesn't allow that deeper trust, intimacy, connection, and harmony to take place, nor does it let people grow into their full potential or blossom together in the beauty of relationships. There's room for compassion in healthy boundaries because they're not too rigid and not too porous. They're like Goldilocks, the space between, fine balance. And this balance is a practice. It's not a thing to perfect. No one's perfect. We all make mistakes, and no one has perfectly healthy boundaries. However, being clear about what is a yes for us, what is a no for us, what we do feel, what we do want, going for it and heading in the direction, we can experience amazing levels of fulfillment and satisfaction in our lives. In this universe based on the law of attraction, what we focus on ends up manifesting, and what we give power to co-creates this life that we live in, because the things we think, say, and do are energy. They matter. When we're intentional with our energy and we direct it in ways toward what it is that we desire, the outcomes end up often being a lot more beneficial and useful and productive to our own joy and bliss. It also assists others with their own happiness, and the world becomes a better place. When we live with healthy boundaries, we don't end up at rock bottom time and time again, trying to be something for others that we're not. Nor do we try to scaffold other people's lives to fit our own. We simply acknowledge who and what is compatible, what is available, what is in alignment, and by communicating clearly, listening clearly, and sharing healthy exchanges of energy, we're able to really go in the direction of the path of least resistance and what is for our highest good and the highest good of all. I wish you have healthy boundaries in all areas of your life, and that this knowledge and information and wisdom that I've gained and learned helps you in some way. Feel free to subscribe, like, and comment your own experience of what it is to have healthy boundaries for you. Thank you.